America's workforce. Its strength is our nation's success. Join Ronnie Spellman on I Build America podcast as we explore innovative solutions and inspiring stories from leaders and workers shaping America. Discover actionable insights to build a motivated workforce.
I build America.
Welcome to the I Build America podcast. We're excited to have a delightful guest. We're still in Washington, D.C., back in Washington, D.C., meeting with people to discuss the workforce development community and ecosystem around it. But I'm really honored to have a guest that understands the veteran community very, very well. And we're planning to have a great conversation about not only our service members and veterans, but also the spouses and the families. Besa Pinchotti.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Did I get it right?
You got it right.
It's great to have you. You have such an amazing background and experience, both starting in news and television, but now with the military community. And so you work with families all over the world from a military perspective as the CEO of National Military Family Association. Tell us about the organization.
Well, National Military Family Association, which sometimes is called NMFA, has been around since 1969. So one of the longest standing military family support organizations. And in fact, it started right here in DC on Capitol Hill. There were a group of military spouses sitting around a kitchen table and talking about their friends whose loved ones, whose service members were killed in Vietnam, and the fact that there was nothing left for them. There was no support. So these women put on their white gloves, marched to Capitol Hill, including this building right here that we're sitting in, went door to door to get the survivor benefit plan passed.
Right.
And that was the first thing that those women did. And we've been active on Capitol Hill ever since, just making sure that military families get all the support that they need.
Right. What led you in your career to work with military affiliated items? And by the way, that's a great story. For those that are listening in and watching us as well, we're actually in one of the House buildings. So we're not just in Washington, D.C. at a pub or someplace. We're actually where legislation takes place. And it's quite an honor to be here and quite an honor to have you join us in this great place where legislation like the one that passed that created the organization is being made. But what got you into this line of work?
Well, I grew up the daughter of an immigrant. My dad is from Kosovo. So I spent all my summers there growing up. And then when the war started, we lost a lot of family members. And then we had family members who were refugees, and we couldn't find a lot of them. You may remember the pictures of families crossing the mountains into other countries. That was my family.
Oh my.
And the U.S. military came in and quite literally saved their lives.
Okay.
And so I had this deep appreciation for our military always. Wow. And as part of my career, which I was a journalist at the time, I was able to go to Kosovo and talk to our local troops that were stationed there. And every single one of them just wanted to tell me about their families back home. I was trying to hear more about their mission and what they thought of Kosovo, but what they wanted to tell me was, I missed my son's track meet, but he won. You know, my daughter's soccer game was this weekend, my nephew's birthday, and it was the first time that I ever really thought of service members as having families, which I know sounds kind of crazy in the position that I'm in now, but you know, they don't wear the uniform, but they're serving every single day.
Right.
And so as my career continued, I ended up at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, reporting on the beginning of the Iraq War. Met a Marine, and I didn't listen to anyone's advice. They all said, whatever you do, don't marry a Marine. And I did 20 years ago. So we've been married for 20 years. But at that time, I was interviewing a lot of our military spouses, specifically those whose service members were killed in Iraq. And I remember specifically, there was one woman, her name was Janina Bitts, and her husband, Sergeant Michael Bitts, was one of the first who died in Iraq.
Oh, God.
And I was at her door that day, and so were so many other reporters there to talk to her, to tell his story. And as I was leaving, I just kept thinking, where were we every other day?
Right.
Why are we here today and not every other day? Right. This woman, these children, they have a whole life. And so it was that experience being in Lejeune, meeting all the military families, reporting on the community every day, that made me truly care about
Right.
military families. And so after we got over our own transition, where my husband medically retired from the Marine Corps and we reestablished our lives
Right.
as civilians in the world, I kept getting drawn back to this community that I love. And I came to National Military Family Association 12 years ago.
So and that's an incredible journey, by the way. And what's fascinating to me is to hear you tell the story about that service member or the spouse that lost her husband in the military. And I think you're right. Sometimes you have the cameras and the lights, whatever the issue is or topic is. And then when those lights turn off, those people move on to whatever the next story is. But that family is still left with that lost spouse. And I grew up in a military town here in Virginia. And it's hard to see families go through those moments of losing a service member. The interesting part about it is a huge sacrifice for the family, but it means so much to the country, right? Where we're trying to protect the values and what we believe in as a country, but it's a huge sacrifice for the family. And at the same time, in some respects, just a major benefit in protecting what we believe as a country as well. Do you have family still in Kosovo? I didn't realize you were from Kosovo.
Yeah, I do. I still have a ton of family over there. I try to go over about once a year.
That's
My
incredible.
parents are there half the time now, and half the time they're in Texas now that they've retired. But yeah, it's still a huge part of my life. And I have never been to a country that loves the United States as much as Kosovo. It's such a patriotic experience, as you can imagine,
Amazing.
being saved by a country and just that gratitude.
Well, and I think that's something kind of to what I just mentioned about the family. There's a purpose behind having our service members out fighting for what we believe in. And it sounds like Kosovo is an example of that.
Yeah,
That
it is.
sacrifice.
It is. And I don't think that most people really understand the other side of it, because as military family members, you say goodbye, you're counting down the days till your service member gets back. And there's a bunch of different ways to do that. Some families make these paper links and they're tearing them apart. Some families put coins in a jar. And when it's to this point, they know the service member's coming home. So there's a lot of different ways that you're waiting for that service member to come home. But you don't really hear about the great work that they're doing on the other side. And so actually my dad made it his mission to go find the families of the 2 service members who died fighting for Kosovo, and has gotten to know them, thank them, and they're also grateful to understand more of what that loss was for.
And if you don't mind indulging me, I'd love to give a little more perspective on what that experience looks like and working with other countries to try to provide services and support like in Kosovo. What does your father share with you, for whatever you can? What does your father share with you about that journey? You mentioned him walking through whatever areas he walked through to get to the point where the American soldiers could arrive and help the local community. What was that journey like? I hear stories, of course, about other countries and their plight to safety.
Yeah.
What was that like for your father and making that decision to leave? I interviewed someone for a different program who fled Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And to hear his journey about getting through the first checkpoint with Russian soldiers and he had a small infant in the car, only a few months old, and a 6-year-old daughter. That's tough. He went through about 5 countries before he could fly to the United States. And he is so grateful to be in the United States. But I can only imagine what the journey was like for your father.
It was
and
terrible.
making that tough decision to leave everything he knows.
Yeah, my dad he was in Houston at the time, going back and forth. And one of the things that a lot of families from Kosovo did was have one family member that lived abroad that supported the family financially, because it's so hard. But when my grandmother and my aunts and my uncles and my cousins were forced to leave the house, it was, you have 2 minutes to get out of here. We're lighting this house on fire.
Oh, wow.
And they did. And they packed up what they could. They started walking. I had cousins who, lost limbs and were physically being carried by other family members across mountains into other countries, but you didn't know where they were. And my dad was able to go with a news crew from Houston to get a little more access than he normally would into all the refugee camps to physically look for my family. So he went from tent to tent and would open each tent and peek in and see if it was someone that he knew. Okay. They would sneak into these refugee camps on bread trucks because there was a lot of military that you couldn't get in and out, right. Protected areas. And when we finally found our family, they were in different places, but they were mostly in Albania. Okay. And just grateful to be alive, but still not sure when it was going to be time to go back. And when they did go back, everything was destroyed and it was all rebuilding.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing. I know that's very personal. What do you see with the families here in the United States? I know we discussed the entire unit, not only the service member, but the spouse and the kids. And most families are uprooting and moving every few years, which it's a lot of work and sometimes a lot of strain. I know they're doing it because they love it, but it still impacts the family. And we discuss the spouse particularly, and the rate of unemployment in the spouse is fairly high. And most military spouses are very well educated and severely unemployed. What are you seeing from a family unit perspective?
When I think about families, there's two major stressors for our military families, and one is financial and the other has to do with mental well-being, and they are completely intertwined. One definitely impacts the other in every way. So you mentioned deployments, military moves. They're moving every 2 to 3 years, but you're settling into a new school. You're getting on a new soccer team. You're finding a new doctor. You're learning a new community. You're trying to find childcare, but you just left the people that you finally built a relationship with who could pick up your kid from school. Right. And now you start over again. So it's a lot of starting over. And then that also means your career. Military spouses, they're trying to set up the home, and by the time it's time to be able to look for their job, so much time has passed. Then they're showing their resume, which looks kind of choppy. They've had to move a lot and they're trying to explain themselves. But you mentioned the high unemployment rate. It's 5 times the national average. Wow. 20% plus for the past decade or more. It hasn't budged at all whatsoever. And, we've been doing a lot of work to try to change that. There's a lot of solutions on the table. One of them is the work opportunity tax credit, which now applies to hiring a veteran. We'd like to see that expanded so that businesses are incentivized to hire military spouses as well. Because if you know a military spouse and you grew up in a military family, so I know you do, extremely capable, extremely educated, and there is absolutely nothing that you can throw at them that they aren't ready to handle because they're used to lives being on the line, sacrificing for this country, setting up a home with no support, and they do it over and over and over again. So we're definitely on a campaign.
Change and transition isn't an issue for them, right?
Yeah, not at all. They are ready. If your company is in a transition, hire a military spouse for sure.
Agreed. Well, that's a lot in what you said. So you think the work opportunity tax rate, that's under review currently?
Yeah, this is the year that they're looking at it again. It's we don't know if it's going to pass. There's a lot of solutions that we're looking at. One of them includes Department of Labor working with DOD, sharing data to pinpoint exactly where these issues are, because a lot of them have to do with the community that you live in, how expensive it is. Right. San Diego, huge expensive. DC area. There's a lot of places like that we know military spouse employment is even harder. Right. Also, childcare is more expensive. Right. So we'd like to do a better job pinpointing those areas and working on targeted solutions for those communities, and also places that are really remote, which there are those military bases that you know as well.
So do me a favor, for the listener that might not be familiar, whether they're in workforce development or in business leadership, tell them what the tax credit is and how it's functionally set up.
In the United States, there's a tax credit for businesses who hire people that are from certain demographics. So there's a list of them. Veterans are on that list. And in fact, when veterans were added to that list, veteran unemployment dropped significantly. Like, we know that works. So that's why we're pushing for that solution again on the spouse side of things. But also on that list are convicted felons. Right. So I personally can't see why we wouldn't want to support a spouse in that way, because there are so many military spouses that are in need of work, and anything that we could do to open that door to give a military spouse a chance, we know that they will more than rise to the occasion.
And you and I had a conversation before we began recording, and you mentioned something that I think is hugely impactful that a lot of people should hear. But you began speaking about how having an employed spouse from a stability standpoint is so critical. Tell us what you were discussing.
There's a lot of attention right now to veteran mental health and specifically veteran suicide. That number is disturbingly high. And there's a lot of things that we're trying to do collectively as a country and as a community to support interventions for veteran suicide. But the number one thing that you can do to mitigate that, to support a veteran through that transition and mental well-being, is have a military spouse who has employment, steady employment, that can get the family through that very difficult time of transition. I think it's hard to imagine if you haven't been in the military, and only 1% of Americans serve. So you're talking about a lot of people who don't personally get this, including me, who didn't grow up in this. And I learned it the hard way. But you're in the military and it's very specific, and you're told where you live. This is your job. You don't have a lot of choices, but you have a very clear identity and a very clear mission.
Right.
And then when that's gone, you're trying to figure out what you are.
Right.
What's
They lose
next.
their identity. I hear that all the time.
Absolutely. And so that transition is really hard in so many different ways. But if a veteran is able to take that time and try to figure out where they fit in,
Right.
and the spouse can hold down the family as they always do, but also financially,
Exactly.
the family does so much better.
Now, I spent a lot of time speaking at military bases for the longest time and speaking with transitioning service members. And it doesn't really matter whether they're enlisted or an officer. That transition and that challenge that you just mentioned is the same. And the challenge is, again, there's a routine. They know one of the service members said this to me. He was an officer. I think he was a pretty senior level physician as well in the military. He said, I'm used to getting up and I know about what my day will look like. I know where I'm going to go, what I'm going to do, and I can kind of map that out. He said the private sector is just different. The rules of engagement are different, the processes, the structure. And he was terrified about what was next because he loved his career in the military, but it was time for him to retire out. And he was so afraid and concerned. And it sounds like that's a common feeling within our military community.
Yeah, it's tough no matter who you are, how long you've been serving. I also know that a lot of veterans want to give their spouse the first opportunity at that time because spouses have been following them for, 20 years. And now, where do you want to go? Do you want to be by your family? Are we moving across the country to Washington State? Are we trying to hang on here? In fact, I remember when my husband left the Marine Corps, I was working as a journalist. I still had a contract and he said, I'll follow you. You tell me, what are we doing? Because, you were stuck here. We call it stuck. I couldn't go,
Sure.
Anywhere. We started our family there at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, which is small.
Right.
But it's all options are on the table.
Right.
And that's kind of hard to navigate.
Hearing you say that, I've heard a lot of members say that before, that they're willing to go where the spouse wants to go. And I heard it, but I don't think I had the perspective fully on it. And you're right. They're so used to the spouse following them as enacted with a service member that they're trying to give back. I think there's probably a little guilt in that. And they're willing to give of themselves that sacrifice to go where the spouse's family might be, or where they want to go from a career perspective. So that's really interesting you mentioned it.
For sure. And another thing is that a lot of families make choices to stay close to their family. So a service member who's deploying a lot, a service member who's going to have a very unpredictable job, working strange hours, and maybe someone's kids are in high school, families will choose to stay where they are. And we call it it geo-batching. So the service member goes off maybe for 2 years, maybe even more. We know families who've geo-batched for over a decade because a spouse's career was really important for all kinds of reasons. We have a campaign at our organization called More Than a Spouse, and it's all about sharing the stories of military spouses who do so much, elected officials, scientists, all of these things. But you have to make sacrifices one way or another to continue in those careers.
So tell us more about the campaigns and projects and initiatives that you have within the organization, because I understand you're traveling the world and you're speaking a lot across the globe.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of your experiences in speaking to groups, where you're going, why you're going. It's not just here in the U.S. that you're trying to bring attention and solutions to challenges.
Yeah, interestingly, a lot of countries don't really think about the families of their military. And so even recognizing that as a population is something that we spread the word on a lot. I've definitely spoken a lot about this in Kosovo, but also in other places. But here in the United States, I have the opportunity to represent military families in all kinds of different places, whether it's business community, Capitol Hill, events. We have a military spouse scholarship program. It's called the Joanne Patton Military Spouse Scholarship, Joanne Holbrook Patton. This year we'll be giving away our $10 millionth dollar.
Oh, wow.
And these are for spouses in any career path. So the unique thing about our scholarship is that it's year round, because life happens year round. It also can be for a license, a certification. It can be for your degree. It can be for your PhD. And it can also be for your entrepreneurial expenses, because that's another place that a lot of military spouses find works for them, because if they're building a business that they can take with them, they have more agency.
That is incredible. So how did that start? And then what are the thresholds to applying, and then the ranges from an award perspective?
These are for active duty military spouses or surviving spouses. They can apply year round on our website, militaryfamily.org. And the range really depends on a lot of different things. We have between a $500 for a certification. We've given a $10,000 scholarship, and that's what we call a finish line scholarship, because a military spouse is so close and just needs that extra boost. $1,000, $2,000. So there are a lot of different amounts. But one thing that we hear from spouses is that the money is great. Obviously, it's nice, but education is so expensive. So it's not really just about the $1,000 or the $10,000. It's about a vote of confidence that someone believes in you and that you can do it. Because a lot of spouses get really beaten down over the years when they're leaving one job after another, and they're living in a country where they're not able to work for whatever reason, and they're moving, and they're in a basement or in a hotel while their house is getting set up. It's tough. So someone saying, I believe in you and you can do this, is just as meaningful as the money.
Now, you mentioned two things there: the temporary housing, which it can be tough. Living in an uncertain place until the home is ready, particularly when you have kids, and how does that impact the school that they might attend? And that's hard. And then living abroad, you're right there as well, that a lot of times those spouses can't work in the local economy.
That's right. There, a lot of different countries have interesting laws about that. Some are much tougher than others. And so you can either work on the installation where there's some jobs, but not that many, and maybe not that flexible either, or just wait it out or volunteer. We have a lot of people who volunteer with our organization from overseas while they're stationed there. But another program that we have for overseas families is our Operation Purple Summer Challenge. So we have camps for military kids. That's called Operation Purple. Kids get to go out in nature for free for a week with other military kids. And we teach them a lot of skills without them knowing that we're teaching them, right? So we'll use a STEM activity that they just think is cool, but really we're teaching them stress tolerance. Or we'll use a sports activity and we're really trying to teach them about communication. So we're teaching them these skills that they can take to their next duty station. And you know that when you're building your stress tolerance, you know that when you go to your new school and the first day was tough and the second day was tough and the third day, you know that eventually you will conquer it. So that's hugely important. But the summer challenge is a version of that we started in COVID. It was a virtual. And during COVID, it was any age. I mean, we had 1-year-old to 99-year-old family members. Everyone was on it, and they were on it all the time because everyone was looking for something to do. We had global gatherings, activities each day. So we've continued to adapt that to what families need. And what we're finding is that families need summer programming. And a lot of times summer is a hard time because you're PCSing and you're overseas, or you're just busy, or maybe your kid has a medical need and can't go away to summer camp. There's a lot of different reasons that families have told us that they need this opportunity. And so our summer challenge is a virtual version of camp, and kids will call in from the back of their SUV where you can see all their moving boxes, or they'll call in from Germany. And it's just a great way to support that community no matter where they are.
That's an incredible resource. It sounds like amazing. I think it's so helpful that the GI Bill can now be passed on to spouses and to kids, if I understand the details. And I'm not an expert in that area, but so I don't know if you've tracked that as well and help families understand the mechanics of how that could work, particularly on the education side, as you mentioned earlier.
For sure. Yeah, a lot of veterans save that for their kids' education expenses. A while ago, you had to do a specific thing to make that transferability possible, but it's something that we continue to make sure that families are aware of and have access to, because we all know education is extremely expensive. As I know you mentioned, you have a college-aged kid, and I have one that's going off to college too, and it's a real shock to the system.
Right. And and maybe you can help me. I don't know if as many people in service know that that's an option, is what I'm hearing. And so if I can say it 50 times so that people know that that's an opportunity, it's important.
Definitely. And we shout it from the rooftops as well. But I think on those issues in particular, there's a lot of support for service members as they're transitioning out.
Okay.
However, so much information is being thrown at them that things fall under the radar. Right. And so it ends up being a lot of word of mouth, like, hey, I was able to transfer this. Were you? And actually, there's a lot of military spouses who get very, very educated on these things and share with others in all kinds of different ways, whether it's a podcast or whether it's on social media. So this community supports each other like nothing I've ever seen before in all the best ways.
I met a wonderful young lady who was in the service for quite a number of years, I think 10, 12 years. And she had some challenges in understanding how her disability would work. She was medically discharged. And it was such a process that she did exactly what you mentioned. She's been going back for free, of course, and helping all of her fellow service members understand how it works, because there's just, there's so many documentations and steps, and it's not necessarily bad. It's just complicated. So she's been doing exactly what you mentioned.
Absolutely. So this is core to our organization. It's all about military families who've been through a thing. They felt it themselves, and they can't fix it for themselves, but they can fix it for someone else. So that's what that's all about. And every single person who works at NMFA has some kind of story about how that has happened in their own lives.
Right. So what's next for you in the organization?
Lots of things going on. We're kind of navigating all of the changes on Capitol Hill. It's summer camp season, so that's the big thing. But also, right now, we're very interested in what's happening with our military teens. We adopted an organization that is now part of NMFA, and it was for teens by teens, and it was called Bloom. And this was created by 2 military teens. One had to go to Korea with their family, the other to Pennsylvania, and they were having a lot of struggles adjusting and adapting. Okay. So they started this online community, and it just grew and grew into the thousands. And then we started doing research with them about what military teens are going through. And this is a population that not a lot of people look at, but it's hugely important because this is your group most likely to serve in our military in the future. More than 50% of them say that they plan to serve. Oh, wow. And these are teenagers. And so that's soon. Right. But then also, if they are a child of a wounded, ill, or injured service member, that number goes up to 80%. So when we think about military life, it's actually a circle that continues, because you're a military kid, you're a military teen. Now you're a service member, or maybe you're a military spouse. Right. Now you're having kids who become military kids who then also join the military, and it just continues in that way. And so a lot of the issues that we try to work on Capitol Hill and in communities have to do with the fact that if we don't get ahead of them, if we don't look at these kids, if we don't look at these teens and give them the support that they need, we're just pushing these problems into our military families.
Gotcha. And that's fascinating. So you said more than 50% of the kids of service members go into the military. Right. And I am always...
Well, they say they are interested in serving. So I'll say that.
Okay.
Yep.
But what's fascinating about it is that I enjoy meeting a service member, and I ask them, how do they become interested? And it's exactly what you mentioned. My mom or dad served, and their mom or dad served, and it is generational. And it gives me chills just hearing that, because there's so much pride in the fact that they had several generations serving in the military.
It's interesting, too, because in our surveys that we do with military teens, we release every year a military teen experience survey. And we look at everything from food insecurity, mental well-being, self-harm. And military teens are telling us that they are dealing with a lot. Food insecurity numbers are higher than what DoD is reporting overall for families, which is 25%, which is also embarrassingly high. But teens are saying it's even higher than that. And a lot of them are working to financially support their own families as well. They also self-harm at rates that are way higher than civilian counterparts and do that over and over and over again. So we're looking at all of these things. And then at the same time, same survey, they're telling us we're dealing with X, Y, and Z. Do you plan on serving in the military? Yes, I do. And so we've been talking to these teens and we say, why? But when you grow up with that pride in your country, that sense of duty, that sense of service, it's almost not even an option not to consider it.
That is absolutely amazing. And so I am proud that there's an organization like yours that's helping our service members and their families and trying to provide a voice to that community. And so I appreciate all that you do. And I appreciate you being a military spouse as well.
Thank you. I appreciate your military family.
Well, I didn't serve, but I grew up in a community and I was around it. And you're right, seeing my friends come and go through the years, it's fascinating, right? And there's so much respect that I have for those service members and those kids particularly. So I appreciate what you're doing. If you had to leave any thoughts and ideas with maybe people who aren't in the service about the value of what you do and what our service members and their families sacrifice, what would you say to them just to help them understand the significance? I know you said a lot in the program, but what would you leave them with?
Military families serve too, and they do it every single day, and they don't talk about it, and they miss birthdays, graduations, Christmases, Thanksgiving. They make all of these sacrifices so that you and I can enjoy all of those things, so that we can enjoy birthdays, so that we can wake up in the morning and go to work and school without worrying. So military families do this for us, and so it is our duty to care for them.
Right. I appreciate you joining us on the program and sacrificing your time to come and share with the rest of the country and the world what it is that you mean and our service members means to the United States.
Thank you so much for paying attention to this topic, to military families, for all you're doing to support military families and our economy as a whole.
Absolutely. So tell us again how anyone can find you so they can learn more.
We are at militaryfamilysingular.org. We're one big military family, so militaryfamily.org. You can also follow us on all the social media challenges. You can see pictures of what's going on in camp, stories about military spouses making it work and being more than a spouse. You can see what our teens are up to and also support some of our legislative initiatives that make life better for our families.
Wonderful. Now, if I can tell any business leader listening to the program, definitely hire a veteran and their spouse, as well as the kids once they become of working age. Know that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has a lot of programs surrounding that concept as well and a lot of research. The Hiring Our Heroes program is a great program. So I appreciate anyone when you're looking at workforce development, that veteran component is a significant component to the workforce process around the entire country. So again, I appreciate you joining us, and I appreciate you joining us for the I Build America podcast.
Thank you for listening to the I Build America podcast. Please subscribe, share, and comment, and be sure to join us next time for more insights and inspiring conversations on building a powerful American workforce. I Build America, building workforce success one podcast at a time.
I build